of Nuh alayhi salam, reminding us that his prayer was accepted and he was saved and his evil nation was destroyed. So we were told, وَنُوحًا إِذْ نَادَى مِنْ قَبْلِ فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ فَنَجَّيْنَاهُ وَأَهْلَهُ مِنَ الْكَرْبِ الْعَظِيمِ. And remember Nuh, when he called to Allah before that, so we responded to him and saved him and his family from the great flood. وَنَصَرْنَاهُ مِنَ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَوْمَ سَوْءٍ فَأَغْرَقْنَاهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. And we saved him from the people who denied our signs. Indeed, they were a people of evil, so we drowned them altogether. And the main lesson, the main moral of that story is patience. That Nuh alayhi salam was extremely patient with his community, he was extremely patient with his people, and he continued to persevere, remain steadfast and strong in the face of all these difficulties and hardships that he was experiencing. So to remain patient, sincere, and to always have hope in the mercy and help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, despite what may seem like obstacles that are impossible to overcome. So the main message would be to always have hope. Always have hope in the assistance, the help, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that we're supposed to draw strength from the example of Nuh alayhi salam, who continued to call his people towards faith in Allah for 950 years. And despite the fact that most of his people rejected him and didn't believe. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, so be patient, indeed the best outcome is for the righteous. Right? فَاصْبِرْ إِنَّ الْعَاقِبَةَ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. That be patient because the best outcome, the best result, the best ending is for the people of God consciousness. Now, as we've discussed before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's mentioning these particular stories in order to console and comfort the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially in response to the difficulties and harms he was facing from his own people, from the people of Quraysh, to strengthen his resolve and to be patient. Now in these next few verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very briefly mentions the story of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhimus salam. And again, the story is not being mentioned with all of its details in its entirety. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just mentioning a very brief summary of the story itself. And in terms of sequence, this is the fifth story that's being mentioned in Surah Anbiya. So previously we were introduced to the story of Musa, to the story of Ibrahim, Lut, and Nuh alayhimus salam. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is introducing us to the story of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhimus salam. And just like in the previous story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to mention some of the great favors, some of the great blessings that He had given to both of these prophets, to both Dawood and Sulaiman. So first He mentions a blessing that was common between both of them, the blessing of knowledge and understanding. So both of these prophets, they were known for their deep knowledge. They were known for their deep understanding. And then Allah mentions blessings that were unique to each of them. So for example, the birds and mountains, they would join Dawood alayhi salam as he praised and glorified Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was one of the miracles he was given, that his voice was extremely beautiful. It had a very nice sound. And when he would praise and glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nature would join in with him. Specifically the birds in the mountains, they would praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala along with him. And he was also given the unique gift of making armor with his own hands. And they say historically that he was the first person perhaps to develop and make and to craft armor in the history of mankind. As for Sulaiman alayhi salam, he was given gifts by Allah that we would think of as being magical. He was given these amazing gifts. Air was made subservient to him along with the jinns and Satans. And it is said that he had the ability to speak to animals and he could understand the language of the animals as well. So a lot of the miracles that were given to Sulaiman alayhi salam, there are things that seem to be magical, they seem to be extraordinary. But we believe them, we accept them as miraculous because we're being told about them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has power over every single thing. He has the ability to give a human being, to give a prophet, the ability to understand and communicate with animals as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts the story by making a brief reference to one episode from the story of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhimus salam. And tonight we're not going to mention the entire story. We'll just talk about the parts of the story that are referred here in Surah Anbiya. Now Dawood alayhi salam, he was not only a prophet, but he was also a fair and just king. So Dawood alayhi salam, along with being a prophet appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he was also a very fair, a very just king. And he was a just and righteous ruler who brought peace and prosperity to his people. And he would divide his working day into 4 parts. One part was to earn a living and rest. The second was to pray to his Lord. The third was to listen to the complaints of his people. And the last part was to deliver messages. So one day while he was sitting listening to and solving the problems of his people, 2 men came to him with a dispute. One of them was a farmer and the other was a shepherd. So in his role, in his responsibility as a king, one of the things that Dawood alayhi salam would do was serve as a judge. He would serve as a judge between the disputes of his people. So if people had a conflict, if they had a dispute, they would bring it to Dawood alayhi salam. And he would judge between them and he would pass a particular ruling. So one day these 2 individuals come with their dispute, they came with their problem, and one of them happened to be a shepherd and the other was a farmer. So the farmer said, "O Prophet, this man's sheep entered my field last night and ate all of my crops. I have come to ask for some type of compensation." So basically he's saying that, look, the shepherd wasn't doing his job properly. He wasn't watching his animals. So during the night they entered my property and they ate all of my crops. Now I have no crops left, so I need some sort of compensation. He needs to pay me some sort of money. So Dawood alayhi salam, first he asked if this was true. And the shepherd responded, yes, this is exactly what happened. So Dawood alayhi salam, in the capacity of a judge, he ruled that the shepherd was financially responsible to the farmer and should give his flock of sheep to the farmer as compensation. That since your sheep destroyed his crops, the rule or the judgment is that you have to give your sheep to this farmer. That will be a fair, that will be a just compensation. So they agreed to it. Right? The farmer and the shepherd, they found that to be fair, and they agreed to this judgment, and they accepted it. Now, as the 2 men were leaving, they passed by Sulaiman alayhi salam, who at this time, the narrations mention he was only 11 years old. But he was also known for his judgment, he was also known for his wisdom. So they told him his father's ruling, and he said that if he were the judge, he would have ruled with something that was more considerate to both parties. So Sulaiman alayhi salam is saying, look, I agree with my father's ruling, but if you brought the case to me, I would have ruled in a different way. I would have mentioned something else. So he went to his father and told him his opinion. He said that the shepherd should take possession of the field and cultivate it until the crops grow back. And the farmer should take possession of the sheep and make use of their wool and milk until his crops grow back. So Sulaiman alayhi salam, he came up with a sort of compromise. He's saying instead of both of them having a loss of property, and now that the person has to give up his sheep as well, they should come to this agreement that the shepherd will give his sheep to the farmer. And the farmer can use those sheep and benefit from the wool and benefit from the milk. And the shepherd should take possession of the land and he should work on it. He should cultivate it, he should plant the seeds, he should harvest the crops. And once that's done, they should switch back. Right? They should switch back. So when the field is fully repaired, both of them should get back their respective properties. In that way, both of them aren't losing out on anything. So upon hearing this, Dawood alayhi salam, he became extremely happy. And he told his son, this is sound judgment. And all praise belongs to Allah for gifting you with wisdom. You are truly Sulaiman, the wise. And he approved of this ruling. He called back the 2 men and he changed his original verdict. And that is the episode that is being alluded to in the following verse. So in verses 78 and 79, that is the story that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very briefly referring to. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَدَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ إِذْ يَحْكُمَانِ فِي الْحَرْثِ إِذْ نَفَشَتْ فِيهِ غَنَمُ الْقَوْمِ وَكُنَّا لِحُكْمِهِمْ شَاهِدِينَ. And remember Dawood and Sulaiman, when they judged concerning the field, when the sheep of a people overran it at night. And we were a witness to their judgment. فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا سُلَيْمَانَ. And we gave understanding of the case to Sulaiman. وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. And we gave both of them judgment and knowledge. So in these 2 verses, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's making a brief allusion to this particular incident. So this verse, first and foremost, is being addressed directly to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, O Messenger, remember and remind others of the story of Dawood and Sulaiman, when they both passed judgment regarding the field that was destroyed by another person's sheep. So Dawood alayhi salam, he initially ruled according to the letter of the law. His judgment compensated the farmer for the damage done to his property, which established justice. So Dawood alayhi salam was working in the capacity of a judge, and his main goal was to establish justice between both parties. And Sulaiman alayhi salam, he ruled according to the principles of compromise, something that was considerate to both parties' grievances. So both of them judge according to their own discretion and understanding, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we were witness and to both of their judgments, and we were witness to their judgment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكُنَّا لِحُكْمِهِمْ شَاهِدِينَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala witnessed and observed both of their judgments. Allah observed and witnessed their judgment, and He knew what both of them had ruled, and nothing is hidden from the knowledge of Allah, who is the all-knowing, the all-seeing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired Sulaiman alayhi salam to give the judgment that was fairer. فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا Sulaiman, that we gave Sulaiman a deep understanding of this particular case. Meaning Allah gave Sulaiman alayhi salam greater insight and wisdom into the case. He gave him a deeper level of understanding and inspired him to give a judgment that was more considerate to both parties. And this judgment allowed both parties to benefit without causing any type of harm or loss to either of them. So it's really important that the commentators mention to understand that Dawood alayhi salam, he wasn't mistaken. Right? When Dawood alayhi salam passed the judgment saying that he should compensate him with the sheep, he wasn't wrong. He was ruling based off the principles of justice and law. There was nothing wrong with his ruling. This only difference is that Sulaiman alayhi salam's ruling was more of a compromise, benefiting both parties. And that's one of the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا, and we gave both of them judgment and knowledge. Right? وَكُلًّا, both Dawood and Sulaiman, آتَيْنَا, we gave حُكْمًا, judgment, the ability to make the proper decision, to pass the proper ruling, وَعِلْمًا, and deep knowledge. So both Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam were given the gifts of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. And both of them had judged and ruled according to their own personal understandings. So the great mufassir from amongst the tabi'un, Imam Mujahid rahimullah, he mentions that both rulings were correct in their own respective right. The ruling passed by Dawood alayhi salam was strictly legal, whereas the ruling passed by Sulaiman alayhi salam was a compromise. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, compromise is always better. And that's why the second judgment was praised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now again here, the reference to the story is very, very brief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't mention any of the details of what happened. He doesn't mention the context or the background. And the reason for that is because oftentimes all these details are not really important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to highlight the main lesson, the main moral, is that both of them passed a judgment. Right? Both of them came to their own independent conclusions, and both of them were right respectively. Both of them were correct. But one position seemed to be more fair. One position was more of a compromise. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised that particular position. So based off of this incident, a lot of the commentators of the Quran, they discuss the issue of differences of opinion within Islam. So within our faith, within our religion, within our practice of religion, there are a lot of differences of opinion amongst the fuqaha, right? Amongst the scholars, amongst the jurists, especially when it comes to legal rulings regarding particular issues. And living here in a very diverse Muslim community here in America, we are exposed to a lot of these differences of opinion, especially sometimes in the way people pray, in the way people sometimes even recite Quran, or sometimes the way people make the adhan and make the iqamah. We see that there are differences in people's practices. And these are known as differences of opinion within Islamic law, within the Sharia. So it's a very important topic, and it's something which is often misunderstood. So it's going to be, I think it's really beneficial to spend a little bit of time talking about what is considered to be a valid difference of opinion, and as Muslims, how should we approach them? How are we supposed to understand them? What should we do? So a very commonly asked question is the following: that if we all refer to the same sacred text, if we're all referring back to the same sources of the Quran and Sunnah for guidance, then why are there so many differences between the schools of thought? So every single school of thought, and today in the world there's 4 extant schools of thought. There's the Hanafis, the Malikis, the Shafi'is, and the Hanbalis. So all of these are legal schools of thought which are valid to follow. They all have valid opinions. And each of these schools of thought, the basis of their rulings, the basis of their judgments is the Quran and Sunnah. Right? Each of them is following the Quran and Sunnah. The only difference is that there are slight differences in approach. There's differences in methodology. So they may come to different conclusions. They may have differences of opinion. So if they're all following the Quran and Sunnah, then why is it that they differ in several issues? Where do these differences come from? So in other words, if all the schools of thought are using the same sources to derive rulings, then why do these differences of opinion exist? So understanding when it's acceptable to have differences of opinion and the reasons behind them is extremely important, because it provides a lot of clarity and it clears up a lot of misconceptions and understandings. And when we understand the reasons why they differed, we'll see that they only disagreed as a consequence of striving for what is right and true. They did so having established principles and formulated precepts, and they agreed in all that they could be agreed upon, and they disagreed only when disagreement was unavoidable. So each school of thought, each scholar, they developed their own methodology. They had their own principles, they had their own qawa'id, their own precepts which they used to interpret the Quran and Sunnah. So they might be looking at the exact same verse. They might be looking at the exact same hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but they understand it in 2 completely different ways. Or they're going to come to 2 completely different conclusions. And as long as that method of understanding and that method of interpretation is correct, there's no harm or whatsoever in these differences of opinion. So they did so because of the evidence they had in front of them and how they understood it. And the major reason is their difference in understanding the text of the Quran and Hadith and their approaches to them. So the plurality of opinions is a benefit and blessings for the community, not a nuisance for us. There's a very, very rich tradition of diversity and disagreement within Islamic law that has always been tolerated and accepted as long as that disagreement is valid. And this is something that even existed during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that even his companions would understand his words in different ways. And because of that, they would come up with slight differences. So there's this very famous incident when the Prophet ﷺ was sending his companions to the tribe of Banu Qurayza. Right? And he told the companions, لا يصلين أحدكم العصر إلا في بني قريظة, that none of you should pray Asr except until you reach the place of Banu Qurayza. So now they're traveling and it's Asr time. And Asr time is about to end. So a group of the companions say that, you know what, we need to pray before time ends. And the other group says, no, the Prophet ﷺ explicitly said, don't pray until you reach Banu Qurayza. So now they have this difference. So one group of companions, they're not looking at the literal words, but they're interpreting it. They're interpreting it to mean that the Prophet ﷺ said that so that we travel quickly. He just wanted us to hurry up and get there before Asr ends. And the other group said, no, he explicitly said, don't pray until you reach there. So one group of companions decided to pray, and the other group decided to delay it until they reached their destination. And when the Prophet ﷺ learned about this, he said, you're both correct. Right? You're both correct, you're both upon the sunnah, you both did something that is right. So you have the same words of the Prophet ﷺ, but it's being understood in 2 different ways. Another maybe clearer example would be in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about the waiting period for a widow. He tells us, or not a widow, for a divorced woman. وَالْمُطَلَّقَاتُ يَتَرَبَّصْنَ بِأَنفُسِهِنَّ ثَلَاثَةَ قُرُوء, that the divorced woman should observe the waiting period for 3 cycles. So the word that's used is quru, right? And the word quru in the Arabic language, it's the plural of the word qur'un. Now it just so happens that the word qur'un in the Arabic language is a homonym. It has 2 meanings that are the exact opposite of each other. So one of the meanings of qur, it could be the cycle of impurity. It could mean hayd, right? And one of the menstrual cycle. And one of the meanings of qur could be the cycle of purity. So it's a word that's known as mushtarak. It's a homonym, And it just so happens that both meanings are the exact opposite. So now the jurists, they look at this verse and they need to determine what is the waiting period for a divorced woman. Is it 3 menstrual cycles or is it 3 cycles of purity? So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah and his students and his school of thought, they understood the word qur to mean a cycle of impurity, meaning menstruation. And that is why according to the Hanafi school of thought, when a woman is divorced, her waiting period is 3 menstrual cycles. As opposed to the Shawafi', Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah and his students, they understood the word qur to mean a cycle of purity. So according to them, the waiting period of a divorced woman is 3 cycles of purity. So they're looking at the exact same verse, the exact same words, but they've interpreted it in 2 different ways. And this interpretation is perfectly legal, it's perfectly valid, there's no harm in it whatsoever. Because both of them are based upon evidences and proofs and principles and a different methodology of understanding. So this difference of opinion is something that is valid and it has been allowed within the scope of the Sharia. And the diversity of opinion that exists within Islamic law is something that's an accepted reality and something that is actually celebrated. Historically, it wasn't something that was looked down upon. It wasn't seen as a cause of division. It wasn't seen as a cause of disunity. Rather, it was something that was celebrated, that showed the expansiveness of the Sharia and its ability to adapt to different situations and different scenarios. So for example, there's a famous scholar of the past, Imam As-Suyuti rahimahullah, he said that know that the differences of the schools of thought in Islam are a big blessing and a great grace. It has a delicate secret that is understood by those who know, but the arrogant are blind to it. He says, اعلم أن اختلاف المذاهب في هذه الملة نعمة كبيرة وفضيلة عظيمة وله سر لطيف أدركهن العالمون وعمي عنه الجاهلون. That there is this secret to the differences of opinion. And the secret he was getting at is that that's what makes the Sharia so expansive. That's what makes it so adaptive. It has the ability to adapt to different scenarios and different cultures and different environments. Another famous statement of the scholar is that their consensus is a binding proof and their differences are a vast mercy. That when the scholars agree upon something, when the fuqaha, the jurists agree upon something, it's considered to be a proof. That is known as ijma', it's a proof. And when they disagree, it's a source of mercy because it brings this diversity of opinion, and perhaps it might be easier for someone to follow something and for someone else to follow another thing. So all of us, we are aware that there are certain issues within fiqh that are disagreed upon. As a matter of fact, within Islamic jurisprudence, there are a number of issues in which there is a valid, accepted difference of opinion. And it's important to understand that difference of opinion is valid only in those issues that allow for differences to exist. Meaning there are issues that are open to interpretation. And these issues, they are classified as mujtahad fi. Right? They are classified as manners or subjects that are open to interpretation. And as long as these differences of opinion are based on sound ijtihad, following established rules of the Arabic language and principles of fiqh, they will be valid. So for example, according to the Shafi'i position, a person should raise their hands to their shoulders when starting prayer. Right? There's these slight differences that exist in the way people pray. So according to the Shafi'i school of thought, when you start prayer, you're supposed to raise your hands till your shoulders. But the Hanafi school of thought, they say, no, you should raise your hands till your ears. Where your thumb should go, they should be next to your earlobes. So both of these are correct, right? They're both correct understandings because they're based off of different ahadith, different narrations from the Prophet ﷺ. There's one hadith that states the Prophet raised his hands till his shoulders. Another one says that he raised his hands till his ears. So the Hanafi school of thought, using their principles, using their methodology, they gave preference to the hadith that talks about raising it to the ears. And the Shafi'i school of thought, they gave preference in using their methodology, their understanding, to the hadith that says raising it to your shoulders. Similarly, there are differences regarding how to hold one's hands in prayer. Right? Some schools of thought say you should tie your hands on your chest. Others say you should tie it above your navel. Others say you should tie it below your navel. There's some schools of thoughts or opinions that say you don't tie your hands at all. Right? All of these are valid differences of opinion. There's differences of opinion regarding Surah Al-Fatiha. Right? According to all the schools of thought, the Shafi'is, the Malikis, the Hanbalis, that reciting Surah Fatiha in Salah is wajib. You have to do it, even behind the Imam. But the Hanafis say it's not wajib. It's not fard, it's not mandatory, but it is wajib. Or reciting behind the imam. Right? According to the Hanafis, if the imam is leading prayer, you're not supposed to recite behind him. You're supposed to simply stand quiet and listen to the imam reciting, saying ameen out loud, and the list can go on and on and on. Right? There's a lot of valid differences of opinion that exist. And issues of Islamic jurisprudence, they aren't as black and white as people make them out to be. Right? As a matter of fact, they are very complex, and they require the expertise of scholars to comb through the Quran and Sunnah to search for relevant texts and use the rules of the Arabic language, principles of fiqh, and their understanding to extrapolate and derive rulings. And in addition to that, they will look at the conclusions of previous scholars or experts and understand their arguments and reasoning for those particular conclusions. So again, it is possible that two scholars will have the exact same verse in front of them. They will have the exact same hadith in front of them, but because of their different principles and methodologies, they will arrive at two opposite conclusions. So fiqh and understanding Islamic law and deriving legal rulings is more complicated than we think. It requires expertise not only of the Arabic language, but it also requires expertise of the principles of fiqh. Right? What are the rules? What are the principles used to derive these rulings? How do words convey meanings? How are those meanings understood? What is considered to be a specific word? What is a general word? What's considered to be a homonym? What's not considered to be a homonym? What's restricted? What's unrestricted? There's a whole complex way and methodology of approaching the Quran and understanding it and interpreting it. And the same thing with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, it's important to note that when these differences of opinion exist that are valid, it is important for us to respect them. And this is something that the scholars wrote about extensively in the past, and they entitled this as adabul ikhtilaf. Right? There's something that is known as adabul ikhtilaf, having the proper manners or ethics of disagreement. And unfortunately, this is something that is greatly lacking in our communities. Right? Especially here in America, and since our community is still literally in its infant stages, oftentimes these differences of opinion lead towards debates, and it leads towards conflicts, and sometimes it leads towards argumentation, and it creates ill will, and sometimes it creates friction within community members. So this is a subject that all of us should understand, we should study, and it's something that we should know how to deal with valid differences of opinion. So first and foremost, when it comes to valid differences of opinion, these issues should be discussed by those who have the proper qualifications to do so. So just hypothetically as an example, every single year when Ramadan comes, right, one of the issues that everyone starts talking about is moon sighting. That are we supposed to sight it with the naked eye or not? Can we use calculations or not? Do we go with global sighting or local sighting? Whatever it may be. Now all of these are valid differences of opinion that exist within the scholarly body of work. And every scholar, every imam who's trained, they have the right to go with whatever opinion they feel is stronger, or whatever opinion they feel might be more conducive to the community. So that should be a discussion that's left to these scholars, to the people who are trained, the people who have the understanding of the complexities of the issue itself. That's not something that we should get involved in and argue about and create a discussion and create a conflict regarding it. And there's multiple issues like that within the community as well. So just because someone follows a different opinion, then ours doesn't automatically make them wrong. It doesn't make them lenient or somehow a deviant who's destroying the religion. Right? We're supposed to have this attitude of acceptance and inclusiveness. No one should be rebuked, reprimanded, scolded, corrected, advised, or yelled at for following a valid difference of opinion. And this is something that, of course, we've seen in the masjid as well. So, for example, according to the more strict Hanafis, you cannot wipe over your socks, or over regular cotton socks when making wudu. So sometimes people who are very, mashallah, they have a lot of zeal and enthusiasm. If they see someone doing that in the wudu area, they're going to yell at them. Be like, what you're doing is wrong and your wudu doesn't count. Or they'll even go to the extreme that if an imam does it, they won't pray behind the imam. This is something that is absolutely ridiculous. Right? This is something that none of us should be engaged in, we should not be involved in. As long as there's a valid difference of opinion, it is supposed to be respected. We're supposed to have tolerance for it. So no one is supposed to be rebuked or reprimanded for following a valid difference of opinion. So there's a beautiful saying that was developed by the Shafi'is. They said, issues of ijtihad are not rejected with force, and it is not allowed for anyone to force people to follow their opinion regarding them. Rather, they should discuss them using scholarly proofs. If one opinion appears correct to a person, he should follow it. And whoever follows the opposite opinion, then there's no blame upon them. And regarding issues of disagreement, the approach and attitude of the scholars of the past was always the following: that our opinion is correct with the possibility of being wrong, while the other's opinion is wrong with the possibility of being correct. And the reason for that is because there's no way to say with full certainty if someone's opinion is right or wrong. It's something that is very subjective. So a person might have their evidence, they might have their proof, they might have their arguments, but it's all subjective. So I could say that my opinion is stronger, but the other person can also say, no, my opinion is stronger than yours. And it becomes something that's very subjective. So a mujtahid may be right, and at the same time they may be wrong. And this is the attitude and approach that we should follow when dealing with differences of opinion. So the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the scholars of the past had differences, but they dealt with them with affection, with love, humility, and most importantly, respect. And this is something that we see from this particular story. That you have Dawood alayhi salam, who's a king, he's a judge, he's a ruler, he's a prophet, and he gives a particular ruling. And then his son, Sulaiman alayhi salam, who's still a child, he gives something different. And Dawood alayhi salam didn't become angry, he didn't become upset, he didn't, reprimand him or yell at him or scold him. Rather, he said, Alhamdulillah, your opinion sounds better. We might as well go with yours and tell him to follow what your ruling and your opinion is. So although people disagree, they still had respect for the other person and their opinion. In our tradition, it is full of examples of love and respect scholars showed for each other despite their differences. So there's a famous story between a person by the name of Al-Hafidh Abu Musa Yunus ibn Abd al-A'la, who said, I haven't seen anyone more intelligent than Imam al-Shafi'i. One day I debated him regarding some issue, and we went our separate ways. So basically saying I had a debate with him regarding a particular legal issue, and we went our separate ways. Later he met me, he took me by the hand and said, Oh Abu Musa, isn't it that we can still be brothers even though we don't agree upon an issue? Meaning that this difference of opinion, this disagreement, is not something that should lead towards ill will. It shouldn't lead towards hatred. It shouldn't lead towards contempt. It shouldn't lead towards having bad thoughts about the other person. Rather, they're still our brothers, they're still our sisters in Islam. There's no problem, no issue with having these differences. Similarly, Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, in praise of Ishaq ibn Rahaway, Imam Abu Hanifa's teacher once said, no one like Ishaq has crossed the bridge to Khurasan. Even though he disagrees with us in many things, people will continue disagreeing with one another. Now Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, he's like the founder of the Hanbali school of thought. And Imam Ishaq ibn Rahaway, he was a very famous jurist in Kufa as well. And they had a lot of differences of opinion with each other, right? They differed in a lot of different issues. But still Imam Ahmad is saying that no one like Ishaq has crossed the bridge of Khurasan. Meaning he's one of the most knowledgeable people out there, even though he disagrees with us in many things. Right? Even though we have all these disagreements, he's still one of the most knowledgeable individuals. And people will continue disagreeing with one another. And one last example is that of Imam Malik rahimahullah. Imam Malik, he compiled one of the earliest authentic collections of hadith. It's known as Al-Muwatta or the Muwatta. So once the Khalifa Harun al-Rashid told him that he wanted to make copies of his Muwatta and distribute it across the Muslim world and make people follow it. That you have compiled this book of hadith and sayings of the companions and sayings of some of the tabi'un, and it contains fiqh as well. I want to make this the standard practice of all the Muslim lands. Right? That's essentially what the Khalifa was saying. Harun al-Rashid is saying, I want to make copies of this book and distribute it and make people follow it. So Imam Malik rahimahullah said, O leader of the faithful, indeed the difference of the scholars is a mercy from Allah on this nation. Everyone follows what is correct according to them. They're all upon guidance and they're all sincere to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is Imam Malik rahimahullah, right? the founder of the Maliki school of thought. Now the Muslim community here that we have in America is very, very diverse. Right? We have Muslims from literally every single corner of the globe who grew up learning and practicing opinions that may be different than ours. So if you for a lot of our parents and a lot of the older generation that came from different foreign countries, that if you come from Pakistan, if you come from India, if you come from Saudi, you come from Egypt, then most of the people in those countries, they're pretty much following the same school of thought. Right? If you go to Pakistan, like you can say the vast majority of people follow the Hanafi school of thought. If you go to Egypt, perhaps the vast majority follow the Shafi'i opinions. If you go to Saudi, most of them follow the Hanbali opinions. But now when you come to America, you get this mixed bag. Right? In the masjid, you have people from all over the world standing together. The imam might have learned something different. The followers learned something different. So we're exposed to all of these various differences of opinion. And even children who are born and brought up here, they may even follow opinions different than those of their parents, depending upon who their teachers are. And this is completely fine, and we should not make this into an issue. As a matter of fact, when it comes to these types of issues, we're supposed to let people practice what they've learned as long as it's a valid opinion. So whatever you've learned growing up, whatever you've learned about your deen and your religion, as long as it's correct, as long as it's valid, you can continue to practice it and there's no problem whatsoever. So Sufyan al-Thawri rahimullah said, if you see someone doing something that's disagreed upon and you have another opinion, then you have no right to stop them. Right? If you see someone doing something that's disagreed upon, it's a valid difference of opinion, and you have another opinion, then you should not stop that person. So the diversity of opinions, it shouldn't lead to disunity. Unity and conformity are two separate things. And that's a very important point for us to understand as Muslims. That Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants the ummah to be united. But He does not want conformity. Right? Conformity means every single person looks the same, dresses the same, behaves the same, speaks the same, and does everything in the exact same manner. That's not what's being sought. What's being sought is unity. That we're all working together, we have mutual love, mutual respect for each other, and we're able to work together and we all get along. And we treat each other with honor, we treat each other with respect. So unity and conformity are two separate things. Islam requires us to have unity amongst ourselves, not conformity. And this is something that is very, very important for us as a Muslim community to mature and move on from. And a lot of things, especially in today's world, especially with social media, it just makes this problem even worse. Where people are exposed to so many differences of opinion and different things, and every single person thinks they're on the truth, and that they're correct and the other person is wrong. And it leads again to a lot of negativity, a lot of issues, a lot of problems, a lot of conflict. And that's not the way we're supposed to be. Especially here in America as minorities. We're supposed to do things that bring us all together, that create this love and tolerance and respect for each other, and that creates these strong communities. So that is one thing that the scholars, they usually highlight when talking about this particular incident. And again, it just rises from the fact that Dawood alayhi salam, he passed a judgment which was correct, and his son Sulaiman alayhi salam also passed another judgment which was also correct. But there was a valid difference, right? Both of them, they arrived at their conclusions using different principles and different methodologies, but both of them were correct at the end of the day. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَكُلًّا آتَيْنَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا, that we gave both of them hukm. We gave both of them the ability to pass proper judgments, and we gave both of them knowledge and understanding. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, to also give us hukman wa ilma. Right? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us understanding and judgment and deep knowledge. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst those who are tolerant with each other, who have mutual love and respect for our Muslim brothers and sisters. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unite our hearts and to bring us together and to make our community strong and united as well. Alright, so what we'll do is next week we will not have a session, inshallah. We'll be off next week. And we will pick up from the Thursday after. And the Thursday after, we'll finish the story of Dawood and Sulaiman. And we'll also talk about Ayyub alayhi salam, inshallah. So we'll finish the story of Dawood and Sulaiman along with the story of Ayyub. Alright, any questions? Makes them mad. Yeah. They follow this or follow that. Mm-hmm. This is right. Yeah. Yeah. Own position. Yeah. Still go non-stop. That's why they say all these books on adab al-ikhtilaf, it's very important. Right, to have this adab al-ikhtilaf and to understand where these differences come from and to overlook those differences. Because this diversity of practice is going to exist. It's always existed, it's always going to exist. Right? It's something that you just gotta get off of, and everyone at the end of the day, they're following Quran and Sunnah. Right? Every single group, every single school of thought, at the end of the day, they're all following Quran and Sunnah. There's just a different understanding. And as long as that understanding is within like the valid bounds, it's perfectly fine. I think the main thing is educating our own communities. Right? People just don't know. Definitely. Yeah. With time, yeah. I think with time, people, when they become more exposed to things, they get more knowledge, they calm down. And you usually see that with youngsters as well. Like with young people, when they first become like practicing, they're very overzealous. They have a lot of enthusiasm. And then over time, it kind of mellows out. And even they say you'll notice this with like imams and scholars and preachers, that usually the younger they are, the more like zealous they are. And the more like maybe strict and stringent and like very, maybe they're stuck in their positions. But as they grow older, they become more accommodating and more expansive. So if you look at all the senior scholars throughout the Muslim world, their approach and their attitude and the way they handle these things is very different. It's very different than maybe the younger ones. So maybe that's an aspect of wisdom. The older you get, the more wisdom, the more wise you become as well. Okay, we ask Allah to accept us from us based on the scale of good deeds on the Day of Judgment. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallah bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu khairan, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.